Welcome to our fifth program of She Opened the Door, Ask the Expert Series, Season 2. I'm Linda Yuri Greenberg, class of 2022 from SPS, a member of the She Opened the Door Leadership Committee. The She Opened the Door Ask the Expert series features Columbia alumni who are speaking about their experiences, challenges, and achievements in an interactive virtual setting with audiences from across the globe. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Sasha Cohen. Sasha is a Columbia University alum, class of 2016 from the School of General Studies. Before coming to Columbia, though, she was a two-time Olympian, an Olympic silver medalist, three-time world medalist, 2002 Grand Prix final champion, and the 2006 U.S. champion. She had many exciting adventures after her competitive skating years, including spending a semester at Harvard University studying with the Moscow Art Theater and guest starring on Project Runway. We will get to those a bit later. Right now, Sasha is working at Morgan Stanley's Counterpoint Global team in a research-oriented role. She looks at industry trends that may inform where investments are made. The team looks broadly at themes like nuclear fusion, emerging battery technologies, or meaningful increases in the electricity demand because of AI, and then tries to identify leading companies in these areas. This type of research strengthens their long-term investment plans and allows them to spend time thinking about nascent technologies and how cutting-edge scientific research today can change the world. So near the end of today's program, after we've discussed all of these things, we'll have an audience Q&A. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit a question, and we're going to try to get to as many as we can. So welcome, Sasha. It's such a pleasure to have you here today with the She Opened the Door community.
Thank you, Linda. I'm super excited to join you today.
I know you have so many different things to talk about. I was talking to my husband about this and I said, she is doing it all and then some. So what we wanted to do though today is to start with your earlier life, before Columbia, before Morgan Stanley. You started very early in athletics. You started as a gymnast. You were doing gymnastics first, and then you moved on to skating, figure skating, but also at a young age 7. Then at age 11, you moved into competitive figure skating, which you did right through high school. And it seems to me from our conversations that the focus and drive to do this is all-consuming. How did you manage to graduate from high school as you traveled, as you practiced, as you did all of it?
Well, going back to my early days and starting gymnastics, I was basically a bundle of energy, so much energy that I couldn't sit still. And my mom was trying to figure out how do I run this girl? How do I, set this energy free so I can have a kind of a docile 5-year-old in the house. And so that involved 3 to 4 hours of gymnastics a day, quite serious training. And it was very effective at getting my energy out. From there, I transitioned to skating at age 7, and I immediately fell in love with it. The feeling of gliding across the ice, the challenge of learning a new spin or jump, and then later on the camaraderie with the other skaters that were training at my ice rink. And then when I was 12, it really became clear to me that this is what I wanted to do, and I wouldn't be able to go to full-time school and pursue my dreams to be the best skater that I could be. And so I convinced my mom to let me be homeschooled. And then, my days really consisted of, spending the mornings and early afternoons at the rink, followed by Pilates, ballet, physical therapy, and then, subsequently trips to the costume maker to cut the music for my programs, later on sports psychologist, and just, really uncovering every stone that could possibly uncover to be the best athlete and performer that I could be. And so that also necessitated being homeschooled. And I essentially went, one day a week for 4 or 5 hours to an office building where I had private tutors, one basically 45 minutes per subject per week, and then brought home homework. And that allowed me to spend the most time that I could at the rink, travel extensively to work with different coaches, choreographers, travel for the competition season and the Grand Prix season, which meant being away for a few weeks every fall and winter. And it was really what I needed to do to have my best shot of making the Olympic team in 2002. And fortunately that panned out. But that's kind of a little bit about how I balanced it. But I'll have to say that ultimately it pursuing my dreams as a figure skater required education to be a distant second priority. And it wasn't really until I got to Columbia, more than probably like a decade later, or almost a decade later, that education finally, for the first time in my life, became kind of the first priority. And to have that experience at a campus like Columbia with the incredibly illustrious and talented professors. It was an eye-opening experience. So it came a little late, but it blew me away when it did.
It's always so exciting, no matter when you come to a university and have that experience. And for you, you'd had so much life beforehand, so I'm sure that brought even more to the experience. Um, Going back to 2006, though, that was such a special year for you. You won the U.S. championship, you went to the Olympics in Turin, and then won a silver medal. Most of us have never done that. In fact, I don't know if there's anybody on this call who's done that. Um, how did you feel? Do you remember those emotions in terms of just standing there, hearing, the crowds being on that podium? Just to share with our audience a little bit of that personal moment.
I have to say that it was a very bittersweet moment for me because I went into those games, which were my second Olympic Games, following the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City. 4 years later, after doubling down and refocusing and deciding to commit to another Olympic cycle and hoping for gold, and having struggled through a lot of injuries, equipment challenges, and just um, the stress of taking this on once again. And I think as you get older, the stress weighs on you and it becomes harder. What was maybe easy to do as a 15-year-old or 16-year-old becomes much more challenging as a 20-year-old. And you see other people moving on and moving into other chapters of their life, and now you're 20 and you're training with 12-year-olds. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just you kind of see the progression of time and where you stand within that. But ultimately, in Torino in 2006, I very triumphantly uh, skated a wonderful short program, which put me in first place on top of the leaderboard going into the long program. But I was struggling with a lot of injuries and not able to practice and train and feel prepared, which is a very unsettling, unnerving place to be when you're heading into the most important moment of your life and you're not prepared. And with injuries, it's not something you can push through. It'll make the injury worse. And so you're trying to balance this need for rest. And I actually, was the only skater that didn't practice between the short program and the long program. And there was all buzz, like, why isn't she practicing? Is she going to withdraw? What's going on? And I was, in physical therapy. Um, and so walking into, the arena that night of my long program, it was very stressful. It felt like I had to walk the pirate's plank and jump into an ocean of sharks and like unclear what was going to happen. But I knew that I had to keep marching. And so, if anyone's ever watched that performance, it was a very emotional performance, and it was set to Romeo and Juliet, which is, Prokofiev's version, and just music that really moved me, which is why I chose it. But I did begin my program, and I'm by missing the first two elements, which is very devastating. And I was one of the first skaters in the last warm-up group. And, after that, I was able to rally and finish the rest of the program without making any mistakes. And it was very emotional. And I had immense support from the audience. But there was this sadness that this moment had gone by and it didn't go the way that I had hoped and imagined and dreamed that it would. And kind of with the hand that I had dealt, I showed up and played the best that I could that night. But I think, it's just as a 21-year-old, having spent your whole life training for something, there's so many things going on at once. There are reporters sticking a microphone in your face. There's everybody watching. You're trying to process everything. And then, the next few skaters went on to skate, and, I wasn't sure I was going to be on the podium considering that I had made mistakes. So ultimately, with a silver medal, it was bittersweet, and it wasn't gold, but it was very special to stand on the podium, see the U.S. flag being raised, and kind of put a period at the end of this chapter, or this kind of sentence of that night, and kind of wonder what was next for me. And then again, I think that takes years to unpack and process. But yeah, it was a very special and meaningful night. And again, not all smiles and joy, but definitely a very meaningful end to I think at that point, 15 years of training.
Yeah. It's so much of your career in skating involves growth and change and overlooking, terrible injuries and things that have gone on. But I know that you felt that it was important to think about, others who've helped you in the skating career. I'm going to ask you later about your current career in mentorship, but just very briefly, do you feel that mentorship to allow you to be a competitive skater was an important part of what this was all about?
Ye- I think that, growing up in the sport of figure skating, I remember watching videos of the greats, Brian Boitano and Dick Button and Scott Hamilton and Peggy Fleming. And you think maybe one day I could be like that. Take my skating to the best it can be and compete in Olympic Games, and maybe there will be a skating move named after me, and maybe I'll invent something new. And so those are always kind of like the dreams. And then as I progressed and began to do shows and perform with some of these great skaters like Chris Yamaguchi or Oksana Bayul, I would watch them and I would ask them questions, and they might um, come over to me. And I remember Ilya Kulik, he watched me work on my double axel and to say, oh, okay, well, your arm is over here. So try it again, but do it this way. And just being utterly delighted that that an Olympic champion, someone so great, would take the time to pay attention to me. But, I've had so many wonderful mentors in the sport of figure skating, whether like Judy Bloomberg, who was an incredible ice dancer and really taught me the skating skills of getting into my edges and feeling my footing, within my skates. And it was just wonderful to have this community of illustrious figure skaters that would each give their kind of own little tidbit and advice, whether it was a spiral sequence or a spin. And so I kind of see myself and where I evolved to as an athlete was the result of so many wonderful champions and figure skaters, each giving me their 2 cents and kind of somewhat, molding me along the way. But in terms of the people that had the most impact would definitely be my coaches, as you have this relationship where they see you day in and day out, the emotional highs and lows, and they reach back and talk about past skaters that they coached, and can give you advice, or what happened in like a really tough time and a really difficult Olympic moment, and how that past skater made it through. And so I think my story of mentorship is definitely a patchwork quilt of amazing people that have kind of given me just a little bit to take.
That's wonderful. Um, so you took time away, from the competitive arena and did many interesting things. And I mentioned the Moscow Art Theater semester at Harvard, but there were many other things. And if that's as significant as it sounds like it could have been, just as an interesting thing to do, um, just tell us a little bit about what that felt like and what that was, because I hadn't heard of Harvard offering something like that.
It was an incredible summer offering where the actors of the Moscow Art Theater came over from Moscow for the summer, and they taught at the Divinity School.
Mhm.
And so it was an intensive, I think maybe 8-week program, and we ended up working through some Chekhov plays. I think I performed in the Three Sisters, and I believe I played Irina so far back now. But but it was so wonderful, exploring the world of acting and the arts because, in some ways people might look at figure skating and say like, oh, it's a performance. You're performing in, a different way than an actor, but you're also performing. But yet it was so different. And I found that for me, it was so therapeutic because as a skater and as an athlete, you have to erect these immense walls to not let in fear, to not let in doubt, self-doubt, criticism from the media. You have to be a fortress. And even on days when you feel awful and you don't want to get out of bed and everything hurts and you doubt, every cell in your body doubts that you can do it, you need to bring on this strong voice that says, yes, you can, and you're fine, and just one step at a time, and we march. Where, you might don't even think about that next big mountain you need to climb. Just put your pants on. Put your pants on and then put your socks on and then do your stretching and that's how you would get through these overwhelming, really difficult um, challenges and obstacles in front of you. um, and so that combined with homeschooling, not having many of these normal social rites of passage that one does as a teenager, um, maybe going on like a first date or, just going away to a sleepaway camp, and these experiences that you have as a teenager, I didn't have. They were at the rink, overcoming my own self-doubt with learning new jumps and thinking about the pressure of an Olympic Games 378 days away, and would I be ready? And that was just the mindset and the world that I inhabited. So then when I went to the Moscow Art Theater, and I also ended up taking um, other acting classes as well in Los Angeles, it opened me up to be vulnerable to another person, which is something that I had actively um, developed defenses against, right?
Yeah.
Not letting anything or anyone in to affect me, and not even myself and my own doubts to the degree that I could shut those off. And so, when you're acting, you're in a very for me, uncomfortable, vulnerable place with eye contact, and you're blushing, and you have all these feelings that come up in your body, but you can't turn away and shut it down. You have to see what it does to you. And it's a process and an exchange of vulnerability where your response is not premeditated. It is affected by how that person makes you feel. And yes, the words are scripted, and those in advance. But as an acting teacher once told me, it's really not the words on the page. The words that you're saying have nothing to do with what the person means. Like, have you ever, heard someone say like, I love you, but like, I love you. And, that's, they're really saying that they're annoyed at you right now. And
Tone
then
is everything.
really there's a subtext to
Yeah.
everything, and that's what comes out when you're acting. And so I feel like my experiences acting were kind of like an onion. I was an onion peeling back the layers of the onion and becoming more in touch with my humanity as a person, and kind of taking down the armor that I had built up, over a decade of having to perform at the highest levels.
Yeah. No. Um, It's interesting because I think so many of the things that you moved to were those things that just, would be able to bring you out of that self wall that you had to put up to keep yourself going. And then you published an autobiography in 2006 called Fire on Ice. So I recommend that everybody in our audience pick that up and read about it. Um, how did you feel writing that? And then you did Project Runway. I mean, you did so many things to broaden yourself and to put yourself out there for the public. Um, so all of these different things that you did, bit parts in movies and TV and things. Do you have a favorite? Was it writing the autobiography? Was it being in, doing some of the acting? What was the favorite at that point in time?
I was just like a kid in the candy shop because after spending so many years just in an ice rink, kind of overcoming my own just doubts of, and the difficulty of the day. Suddenly I was invited to the Vanity Fair Oscar party by Elton John, and I got to do CSI New York and be on Las Vegas with Josh and Duhamel. And it was just this wow of experiences and meeting Heidi Klum on Project Runway. And just the fun of, I'd always design my own costumes. And now kind of working with a talented set of young designers of like, yes, maybe you've designed or you aspire to do kind of women's couture, but figure skating is very different. It needs to stretch four ways. How does it move in the wind when you're skating, when you're spinning, when you're jumping? And so that was a very fun experience to kind of lend my wisdom from years of designing skating dresses, and kind of see how that collaboration unfolded. Um, Ultimately, I can't say that I have a favorite, but I look back and recognize what a special time that was. From my first Olympic Games to, maybe a few years after my second Olympic Games, the types of opportunities that I had, getting to perform at the Golden Jubilee for the Queen of England to celebrate her 50th year reign, and to meet her after the performance. Just kind of things that you don't realize as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, that how unusual this is, and the types of opportunities that you're afforded because you're at this pinnacle in time of reaching um, your best kind of athlete self, coming off an Olympic Games where the world knows you and they're cheering for you and cheering for Team USA, and just kind of how you're in the hearts and minds of the American public. And so I look back, and it kind of went by as a whirlwind. And in preparing for this, I had to go back because I don't very often kind of send my bio out that includes, my movie credits, or um, being an interview host on Inside Edition, or guest starring on Project Runway. So I go back and read it. I'm like, oh wow, yes, I did do that, and I did do this, and I totally forgot about it. And so I look back and I recognize how special that is. These days with a full-time job and two toddlers, I usually just try to, remember where my socks are. So
I'm getting through the day. Somehow I'm
it's
getting through
nice
this
to go
day. I
back.
know.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. A project that I'm sure was near and dear to your heart, and certainly I found very compelling, is the 2020 documentary, The Weight of Gold, which focuses on some of the mental health challenges that Olympic athletes in particular face. And it was so powerful. It was a very powerful commentary. And I think we've seen it more and more as the years have gone by, certainly in the last 5 years we have. Um, how did that feel to again be vulnerable and open up and talk about those experiences? And then I promise we'll move on to Colombia after we've wrung this pretty dry. But I know that reliving those moments had to be really challenging at times.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. And I look back at The Weight of Gold, and working on that, and meeting the director, Brett, and just not realizing what it was going to be at the time. And he's like, I'd love to interview you for a documentary about mental health issues and athletes, Olympians. And the genesis of the documentary was very different than what it turned out to be. It was supposed to be um, kind of a triumphant return to an Olympic Games by an Olympic bobsledder who ended up committing suicide. And then the documentary took a very sharp turn. And I think Brett realized we need to focus on the issues that athletes face. And this was at a time that Simone Biles and Michael Phelps were starting to talk about issues of depression or mental health or taking care of yourself. And this was really the first time that athletes of that stature were introducing this concept of vulnerability or not being okay or needing to step away or not pursuing a gold medal at the expense of one's mental well-being and health. And so this was I think, a very important moment for sports, and it was not something that I think would have been possible at the time I competed. And I think it was only possible in 2020 because it was voiced over by such incredible athletes. If it was a first-time Olympian who got 12th place and said they need to take care of their mental health, I think the media would have responded like, oh, they just don't have what it takes to compete at this level, or their nerves got to them. But because it was Michael Phelps and because it was Simone Biles, that really changed the conversation. So I'm very thankful to both of those athletes for standing up, because it's not easy to be the first to do that. And then I'll say that, there's so many elements of this, and, other Olympians that were in that documentary that were close friends or that are close friends and were teammates in 2002 and 2006 were Jeremy Bloom and Apollo Ono. And they're different aspects. The first aspect is like, what is it like to train day in and day out with the anxiety and stress of, will you do this in a solo sport? And will your dreams, like, will you make them, or will you be kind of broken by this moment, and will you regret it for the rest of your life? And that's coming 3-4 years away, and you kind of wonder what will happen. So that's just immense pressure to be under as a young kid and as a teenager. And then the other side of it, since I was interviewed for this many years after I had retired, was, how do you find your new identity? And after you're at the center of attention for the entire world, and you're representing Team USA in something so high stakes and thrilling, that one day it's just over and you're a student and you're putting together your resume and you're applying for jobs and you're just doing the laundry, and who are you now, and what does life mean, and how do you find purpose, and what are you good at? And while I was training every day and spent my days at an ice rink until my mid-20s, uh, my peers outside of sports were on debate clubs and debate teams, and finding their passion in computer science and interning, and really had been thinking about what they wanted to do and developing their identity through the dynamic of their relationships with peers and other mentors, and figuring out their dream school and what they had wanted to do. And then I was 26, finishing a lifetime career as an athlete, and had no idea. So I'm like, well, college would be a good place to start. Uh,
And
so
then you
you're
came
really,
to Columbia.
yes, which it was amazing, some of my favorite years of my life. But I think that second part of the kind of depression or the mental health issues and challenges are like, who am I? And I did one thing my whole life, and now I'm too old to do it. Even if I wanted to do it, like, emotionally, it's a difficult thing to do every day. But now 13-year-olds are doing what, something that I can't do anymore. My body can't do that. And that's just very hard to come to grips to in your 20s, right? I think most people retire from a lifelong career in their 60s, and you've had all these other rites of passage and a family, and now here I was, never really having dated, never having these kind of social dynamics with my peers, and at 26, and homeschooled since I was 12, and who am I? What do I do? And so I think this documentary kind of goes into all pieces of the mental health and the mental outlook of an athlete and kind of where they are in their career trajectory and how you kind of move through that. So I
Mhm.
highly recommend that film. It's wonderful.
Yeah. And so many people, I think, find your journey because it is such a different journey in terms of being an athlete and then finding, the School of General Studies and that time was right for you because here you were transitioning, as you said, into something that most people had done at 18, or around that time to move into that. So memories of Columbia. Was there a particular class, a particular professor? You were involved as a political science and government major. What about Columbia really stands out and during those 4 years that you were at GS?
I really
Or was
embraced.
it five? I think you had so many
Yes,
other things
yes.
going on that you stayed for five.
I did. I was working. I was touring during the weekends and some weekdays. And so I took generally 3 classes per semester and classes in the summer. And I loved it. I was so sad when I graduated. I was not ready to go. There were so many classes that I had not yet taken. And I think after 20 years of being so hyper focused on a goal and where it was leading, I really embraced Columbia as just a chance to learn. And so I loved political science, but I had originally thought I was going to be an econ major. And I had, grown up watching Warren Buffett and CNBC and watching the stock market, and it felt very exciting. So I was like, oh, definitely econ for me. And then I looked at the list of um, prerequisites and requirements, and it was, statistics and macroeconomics and microeconomics and just a lot of kind of more, I would say, technical classes. And I was like, well, this is actually not how I want to spend my time at Columbia. I ended up taking romantic poetry and many philosophy classes, European history, painting classes. And I really jumped into the arts part of the liberal arts degree. And, in terms of classes, I think one of my favorite classes was with Professor Sunil Gulati, who is an economics teacher, but brought such color and vibrancy, that it was definitely not a dry class. And, he was just no one fell asleep, even though it was a class, I think at 8:50 in the morning, people were awake and dynamic and, just very engaged. The other class and professor that I really love was Dr. Judith Russell, and she taught American government and politics. And again, I think it was her ability to really bring, maybe something that could be dry material, and kind of like civics and just the kind of the history of the Constitution and bring such life as if you were kind of in it in that moment and thinking about how the founders were constructing this document and what it meant at the time. And having grown up kind of being primarily like self-taught and homeschooled to be in the company of such talented professors was a treat for me and just really fired up my love of learning. So I'm very grateful to both of them in particular.
Well, you're giving back. You're on the board of visitors for GS. You've spoken at Class Day. I think it was in 2018. How does it feel when you come back, to campus? Is there a nostalgia feeling? Is it just excitement? What drives that feeling about coming back to campus and giving back?
I think it's definitely nostalgia when I walk onto campus and I try to retrace my steps of, the buildings that I took classes in or where I got coffee and sitting, if it's a nice day, sitting on the steps and reading. Um, but I just love my time, and Columbia is such a special campus. And so now to be a continuing part of Columbia through the GS community and to talk about, where is GS going and what is the mission and who are we trying to include and how can we expand the incredible opportunity of a Columbia education to more and more folks, whether they're Olympians, or how do we introduce more people to GS? How do they learn about it? Because it is such a special program. And I only learned about it because of a fellow skater who I toured with, who ended up retiring a few years before I did. But we kept in close touch. It was like, oh, I'm at Columbia. I'm at this program called GS. This is what I'm doing. And I'm like, oh, and that makes sense. Particularly because, when he decided to go to school, I think he was maybe 30. And when I decided to attend university, I was 26. And I think that was really important, to be in a city like New York, which is so vibrant and dynamic, and then have the opportunity to take the same classes as a Columbia University student, but have two very special classes, contemporary civilizations, and I think and Lit Hum, where you're in a small discussion group with other GS students that have this tremendous life experience with different backgrounds, and you can bring the material to life in the context of your own
Mm.
personal experiences in a very different way. And so I love Columbia. Anytime I have a chance to be involved, even beyond the board of visitors, and like today's programming,
Yeah.
and coming back for class day to speak 2 years after I graduated was very special, and getting to write that speech. It's just so special, to anyway, to kind of continue to have ties and strengthen my ties with Columbia, and hopefully I'll get to do that through the rest of my life. And I would love to be one of the people that I saw in the front row at Barnard, who I think, there was a group of retirees, maybe in their 60s or 70s, and they would come every day to the American history class. I think it was like World War I through 1970. And they were in the front row, and they're like, oh yeah, we're just, we're here, we're auditing the class. We come every week, we're retired, and this is what I want to be doing when I'm.
Lifelong learning.
Yes, there are so many classes I have not taken. So you hopefully in 20 years you'll see me on campus just auditing
Yay.
classes.
Yay. All right, well, pivoting, because I'm sure that people in our audience, having heard my description of what you're doing at Morgan Stanley, are kind of interested in that next phase, that phase of your life. I mean, you've had so many phases, but that's where you're working now. Can you explain not so much what you're doing in your role, but just the overall feeling that that work gives you, that, in terms of as a person that's working in this field, how has it changed over the years that you've been there? Because you've been there for a good number of years. Just so that people understand, you know, maybe some tips that they would be interested in about how they could move into that kind of career, but just how your career has developed.
I think, having spent the first chapters of my life very much focused on honing my body and the arts, because although skating is a sport, there is an artistic element to that. And what I did, I was just really interested in developing my mind, and that's kind of what led me to Columbia. I was listening to books on tape and great lectures and courses, and realized, like, maybe it's time to go to school. And I think that same hunger and motivation to learn inspired me to come to this position at Morgan Stanley. And I've realized how lucky I am to be with such an incredible group of people that I get to work with, who are very curious, many of whom are generalists. And so they they can speak to so many different topics at a high level. And I think that really just informs and strengthens the way that they think about the investment world, and can recognize patterns that they see again, but in slightly different combinations as time changes. Because, as I say, I think history repeats itself, but it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, something to that tune. And so, coming to this role, I'm able to do very deep research, and similar to some of the work that I did in my classes at Columbia, where I kind of, as a generalist, take on a new topic of research and have to go from zero to, close to expert in a few months. And it's a very interesting process of finding experts in this space, attending top conferences, finding panels or information from Brookings Institute, and really assembling my own point of view of how important a new technology is going to be and how it will impact the investment landscape. And it's very interesting. Some topics are more interesting than others, but I really enjoy that chance to continue learning and to get to be a generalist. Like every few months, it's a new topic that I get to dive
Mhm.
into. And because we have a longer term approach, it allows us to focus more on the big themes versus kind of on the day to day and what's happening in the next quarter. So I've really enjoyed my experience at Morgan Stanley and my opportunity to get to do this type of work.
Mhm. Is there anything that you would recommend to our audience in terms of um, skills or classes that they should take or ways that they should improve their skills if they're interested in this kind of a position? You know, we're always looking at the Ask the Expert program as a way for us to take our experts and have them say, this is how I've grown, this is how I've learned things, a particular book or just even, a class or something that might help people in the audience to make that kind of a shift.
It's so interesting because I think even since I started working at Morgan Stanley, the world has shifted quite a bit with AI and what AI can do and what can be outsourced and automated and what humans need to do and how humans can differentiate themselves and how will humans adapt to a world where AI can do a lot of the things, a lot of the technical things that humans can do, but do them better and do them faster. So
Yes.
what is the human edge? Like what are humans needed for? And so I think this goes back to creativity and kind of like a liberal arts foundation. Can you recognize themes and how adaptable are you and how creative are you? And then what are your reading networks? And I think specifically in my job, reading is most of what I do, and ingesting information across sources, trying to make sense of it, recognize patterns, and then figure out from there, okay, where do I double tap? What is the next expert, kind of in this line of research that makes sense for me to speak to? And I think especially today with AI's capabilities improving, every month, that is what differentiates humans. And I think, from what I've read and read other employers and other experts either tweet about or write about, is that what will differentiate humans is their creativity, their generalist backgrounds, and ability to recognize and identify patterns and obviously to be curious, to be creative. And I think, those things lend to being more adaptable.
Yeah. I think curiosity is such an important part of everything that you've done. It sounds as if you've certainly shown a through thread of being, curious about the world, even as you were so, you know, involved in the skating world, but you did many other things. So I think that's, a really interesting point to say, open yourself, open yourself to things that you may not think you're gonna be interested in, but just think about them. Um, so you are a volunteer currently for GS. I don't know if you're volunteering currently besides things at your children's schools, perhaps, but or involved with many other things because they're little. Um, but volunteering and mentoring, do you feel, are you a mentor to others at Morgan Stanley? Is there somebody there who's been a mentor to you? Just that little bit of sort of mentorship and volunteering, I think, would just be lovely to hear about where you're at now with that. And then we're going to go to our Q&A. I'll have one last question after this one, and I just want to encourage our audience to be sure to put their questions into the Q&A so that we're ready to ask those.
Absolutely. Well, I think there are two pieces to the mentoring that I do today, and one comes from the skating community, and it's typically something that's like through a friend of a friend or through a skating club, or like my daughter is going through this right now, and she's training for a big competition, and she would just love to talk to you about, the how you handle the pressure, or she's overcoming an injury and how you dealt with that. And so there these types of kind of like relatable, I would say, like pep talks, or putting yourself in their shoes and just sharing your own vulnerabilities and what it was like. And I think that's very impactful for someone that's 12 or 13 to hear, someone that they grew up watching on TV that's like, oh wow, they were scared too, and they went through this, and this is how they made it through this year of injury when they had to withdraw from every competition. And so that's always very special, and it takes me out of the day to day and brings me back to what it was like to be 12 and going through something like that. And then the other piece with Morgan Stanley, I was very lucky that Gary Kaminsky, who worked at CNBC and at Morgan Stanley at the time that I met him, um, met me when I was doing a small piece on CNBC. And he's like, "What are you up to?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a student at Columbia." And he's like, "Oh, it sounds like you're really interested in investing." And I was like, "Yes, I am." And he's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm not sure yet. I know that I love investing. I love Warren Buffett." And at that time, I think I was a sophomore at Columbia. And he's like, "All right, I have an idea. And I want to help you get an internship this summer. I'd love you to go to Morgan Stanley and meet with, these people within Morgan Stanley Investment Management and get to learn a little bit about what it's like in emerging markets or fixed income or growth equity and or real estate." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you. Like I would love that." And he was, Gary was an incredible resource and helped to set me up with opportunities to meet folks outside of Morgan Stanley as well, to kind of just get a little flavor for what the day-to-day would be like within different sectors of finance. And then I think, within mentoring in terms of how I give back within Morgan Stanley. Every year, we always have different interns that work with us, and I always take time to sit down, whether that's virtually on Zoom or in person, and answer questions of what is my role like, what have I learned at Morgan Stanley, what are my favorite parts, and try to give some career advice or be a sounding board, as well as inbounds from other athletes,
Mm-hmm.
that are retiring. I talked to one athlete who's a gymnast. It's like, I just competed in Paris and I just graduated from university and I'm trying to get my foot in the door in finance. Can you give me any advice? And what's your job like? And how can I get how can I get a spot? What should I be putting on my resume? What should I be doing? And so kind of that's the mix of different kind of mentoring conversations that I've had over the years.
Yeah, that's really wonderful because I think, certainly for those listening today or those who are going to listen when this is posted on YouTube, knowing that, you know, you can pivot to something that seems so incredibly different, but was a passion and an interest that you had all along. But how to craft that into a career and how do you think about those things? And I think one of the key things that you're saying is never feel that you can't ask somebody questions about what they're doing or getting that kind of feedback because that can be so valuable, even if you don't think until that moment that you should be asking that question of that person, or listening to somebody who just brings a question to you. So I think that's wonderful. Um, so I want to get a sense of where you're at now, and are there things on your bucket list? Are there things that you're thinking, my next chapter? Is creating something different or doing other things? Is there a personal passion that's keeping you balanced with everything that you're doing, being a mom, being, in the world of finance? Is there anything that's on a bucket list for the future?
It's so interesting how different chapters of your life bring out different pieces of oneself. And I guess the arc or the journey of a person through their life. I feel like I'm smack in the middle of motherhood, and I think something that in like the Indian tradition they call the householder phase, where, you got all your obligations, responsibilities, you run a house, you have to take care of kids. I haven't gotten to the spiritually enlightened kind of guru phase where you can just kind of go off and wander from temple to temple and find yourself without the other expectations and responsibilities. But I think that right now in my life, being a mother is really defining who I am and what I do and what is meaningful. And so maybe in the first part of my life, my goals really were directed outwards and were about my achievement, and who I was in the world and how the world saw me, and how I would write history in that way. And then it shifted into a smaller circle, into kind of like learning and development and finding community, in New York and at Columbia. And now it's very, my world is a little bit smaller because it's my household and the immense investment it takes to raise two children, and what that means to be a parent, and how you want to show up and what you want to teach them, and how you balance um, screens, and they get information, and how are you creating their childhood. And so that's a whole nother, you have to on the side read books on like child psychology and child development and all these other things that you get to add to your plate. But in terms of, I think, what interests me and things I would like to spend more time on is, as a kid, I was immersed in the world of arts as well. I loved to paint, and there was some freedom of expression there, and kind of just letting something be channeled through you, which is how I feel that the movement when I skated was channeled through the music and through my body, that I find in painting. And so trying to find more time for that. And then kind of on the more philosophical side, I have spent a lot of time reading books on identity and transformation and what it means to be here, and why are we here, and who am I? And I think that has changed for me as I've been in different decades of my life. And I think motherhood is now creating this new identity and role and purpose. But I find that something very interesting, to kind of grapple with who we are and what we think we want or what we value in different periods, and how and why that changes on this journey. So I'm not sure what that will turn into, but that's definitely a great interest of mine.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. People are, if and when you have time for a book club, people are always suggesting, new books, things to read, things that will help you with personal growth. If there's anything that you've read recently that you think will be of interest, to help our audience just understand personal identity, or just where you are at in your life story. We'd love to have you mention a few of those, just because sometimes people want to come away with something practical that they can look to say, oh, Sasha recommended this. This is something of interest. I'll at least, take a look at it. So,
Oh, so I have to first caveat and say that lately I've been mainly reading books about child psychology, or child development, or reading for work. But there are a few books can I think back to books that were really meaningful. I think one was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And
mhm.
again, I think just the philosophy of like how you understand yourself and your place in the world in really challenging times, and what you have to pull from, is just a tremendous thought exercise to put yourself there. And another book that I loved, I think, is called, is it Letters to My Younger Self, or Letters to Myself, by Seneca.
Mhm.
I think it's Seneca. All right, I think it's A Letter to Stoic Philosopher Seneca the Younger.
Mhm.
Uh, I have to find it, but if you Google something like Letters to Myself, it's a book of Seneca's letters, to and correspondence, and journals, and just kind of the thought inquiry. And I love the Stoics, and kind of how they make sense of the world and their own emotions as they go through the world. I think was really powerful. And as an athlete, you're spending a lot of time in your head with yourself. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
understanding that is important. And then finally, something that was kind of only piqued my interest lately was I read the history of the Jews, which,
Mhm.
I was raised without any sense of religion. My mom came from communist Soviet Union. And although my dad had Jewish and Christian parents, they kind of favored not delving into religion or having it be a practice in their home, and instead kind of focused on the arts and intellectual pursuits. And so I was raised with zero religion. And then just to kind of understand the Jewish arc through history, the religious aspect, the ethnic aspect, and it was just very interesting. And again, I love history, so I think those three books kind of stand out as some of my favorites.
Wonderful suggestions. So to questions that have come in, as you moved from competitive skating to the corporate world, what were some of the challenges that you faced as a woman in the corporate world? And how did you navigate them? Any tips for us? Because we have just a few more minutes before closing. And if others do have questions that come up, please do use LinkedIn to reach out to Sasha. You can reach out to me as well. And then there is also our She Opened the Door new LinkedIn area. But I just wanted to sneak that question in because I think that one is particularly interesting, is moving into a finance world and being in the corporate world, any particular challenges that you feel as being a woman with a family?
Yeah, I have to say that I'm lucky that within the part of finance that I'm in, within investment management, within Morgan Stanley, specifically within my team, I think I have been fortunate to not face kind of issues or discrimination or challenges because I am a woman. I will say I notice that when I attend industry conferences or you know financial conferences, um, that many of the attendees are men, and sometimes at a dinner I'm the only woman, and so that's just kind of like always interesting to kind of see that gap, or when you see another woman you're like, oh, there's one more of us. And so it's really more from that side, that there's just an awareness of maybe how few women there are, but where I have been, that's not an issue that I have faced, thankfully.
Good. We are almost at time, and I want to be sure that, the way these things often work is everything just stops at 1 o'clock. But I want to just thank you so much for sharing your journey, for being so open, talking about your experience with us, and a big thank you to everyone who joined us today. You can tell others, though, that they can find us. She Opened the Door website. Thank the committee members and the CAA for helping to make today's conversation a success. And certainly a plug for the CAA to say volunteer. Sasha's volunteering, I volunteer. It's wonderful to have more people volunteering. You can find out more information about She Opened the Door at our website on the screen. And as it says in the bottom, that our next Ask the Expert and our last one for this school year will be May 30th. Dr. Ashley Lerman, who has 2 degrees from the dental school, but she's also the founder and CEO of a company called First Grin, all one word. And it's a dental and oral company that she created for babies and for kids. And then as you can see, we have LinkedIn's that you can go to. And another big thank you for Sasha. I'll be reaching out to say thank you again. Lots of thank yous. And with that, I hope that everybody has a wonderful day. And thank you for joining us today. Everybody be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.